Last week, I was looking at some footage from a high-security lab in Beijing. There was this kid, maybe 12 years old, sitting perfectly still in a room bristling with sensors. For hours, he'd been staring at a series of complex topological proofs, the kind of math that makes most doctoral candidates break into a cold sweat. He looked physically drained, his forehead pressed against his palm in near total defeat. But then, in a fraction of a second, his entire posture shifted. His eyes snapped open, his breathing hitched, and he let out this sharp, involuntary gasp, the classic aha moment we've all experienced. In the past, we would have described that moment in almost religious terms. We'd call it a divine spark or a mystical gift, something that separates the visionary from the rest of us. We treat creativity like a ghost that chooses when to haunt us. But as I watched the monitors in the observation room, that magic was being systematically stripped away. On the screens, the kid's epiphany wasn't a miracle. It was a violent, high-frequency burst of neural synchronization. It was a physical, measurable, and, most importantly, predictable event. The researchers weren't cheering because the kid solved the problem. They were cheering because they'd captured the signature. They had successfully turned inspiration into a raw material that could be quantified and eventually manufactured. It reminded me of a conversation I had recently with a parent in the suburbs of Virginia. He was beaming with pride while describing his daughter's progressive school. No standardized tests, no pressure cooker, STEM drills, just whole child exploration and emotional safety. He called it the human way to learn. But looking at that spike on the monitor in Beijing, I realized there's a terrifying gap opening up. While one side of the world is busy deconstructing excellence to protect children from the burden of rigor, the other has just found the physical key to industrializing genius. It raises a question that most are too uncomfortable to ask. What happens to a civilization that treats the aha moment as romantic mystery when their competitor has started treating it as a national strategic asset?
That tension is, that's everything, isn't it? That stark contrast between the romantic, almost mystical view of creativity and this relentless industrial pursuit of cognitive superiority. That's the core of what we need to talk about today.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into the industrialization of insight and what that means for the geopolitics of cognitive sovereignty.
Yeah.
That observation you mentioned, that kid in the lab, it's the perfect starting point.
It is, because it shows the competition has moved beyond just intellectual property or, building better machines. It's moved to the literal physical process of thinking itself.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our sources for this dive, they treat the human brain not as this philosophical garden you tend to gently,
right,
but as a strategic asset, a biological processor in a global competition that needs to be optimized, measured. That's a chilling reframe.
It is, and we're going to break down the mechanisms driving this transformation for you. We're really going to unpack, I think, three major facets of this divergence. First, we have to establish what we're calling the new biological mandate for genius. How are they capturing and quantifying human insight? How is that moving us toward a totally objective neurobiological meritocracy?
Right.
Then second, we have to look at the other side of the coin. The massive risks of cognitive atrophy posed by generative AI, this idea of the hollowed mind, and how that's just a catastrophic accelerator in this whole cognitive arms race.
A huge vulnerability.
A huge vulnerability. And finally, we will explore a potential third path. Is there a way out of this? A future where we might leverage something called generative collective intelligence to create, collective wisdom.
Let's start at ground zero then. The scientific breakthrough that, as you put it, fundamentally disenchanted inspiration. When the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the CAS, announced they had achieved real-time high-fidelity capture of sudden insight, that wasn't just a science paper.
No, it was a philosophical declaration. They essentially took what we call the divine spark and successfully reduced it to an electrical signature on a screen.
And what's truly revolutionary here is that technical reduction, the aha moment, goes from being this spiritual or mystical thing to a measurable physical event.
Exactly. It's a burst of high-frequency neural synchronization. For decades, neuroscientists have hypothesized this, that sudden insight must involve the rapid simultaneous firing of neurons across totally different parts of the brain, creating a new network solution.
Sure, that makes sense.
But the CAS breakthrough was proving they could not only detect this event, but they could capture its signature in real time with incredible precision.
And that detail, high-frequency synchronization, it seems small, but it changes the entire game.
It changes everything.
It's the end of treating genius as this unknowable mystery and the beginning of its industrial capture. It's systematic engineering, if you can measure it.
You can potentially manipulate it. Precisely. And the cognitive science behind it totally supports this move toward industrialization. The aha isn't random. It's the executive result of prolonged, high-intensity subconscious processing.
This is not a lightning flash from the heavens.
Not at all. Think of it more like an explosive discharge of accumulated energy, and that energy builds up through deep, sustained engagement with incredibly complex information. Without the fuel, without that deep knowledge stockpile, the brain physically cannot generate the high-amplitude synchronization it needs to connect the dots.
So it's forged. It's literally forged under pressure and preparation.
Yes.
Which completely reframes creativity. It's not about spontaneity. It's a delayed consequence. It's the reward for all the grinding work that came before.
Exactly.
And this leads us right into the biggest strategic implication, the creation of a new objective meritocracy, what we're calling standardized testing 2.0.
And this is where the geopolitics becomes terrifyingly personal. If your goal is national strategic advantage, and you can now quantify the neurological efficiency of insight itself,
Then what?
then relying on subjective Western admissions metrics, your essays, your interviews, your extracurriculars, it starts to look inefficient. From this strategic viewpoint, it even looks reckless.
But hold on. Those Western metrics, for all their flaws, they're supposed to measure things computers can't, right? Creativity, leadership, social intelligence. Are the sources just saying those don't matter?
They're suggesting those qualities are secondary when the goal is purely technological and computational dominance. The critique from this perspective is that subjective metrics are, well, notoriously easy to game. They often just reward cultural capital and social privilege.
Right.
The new paradigm says, let's use fMRI-captured neural pathways of insight, the synchronization event itself, as the new core metric.
You can't fake a burst of 40 hertz synchronization across your prefrontal cortex.
You absolutely cannot. So that metric becomes the sole unforgeable currency of advancement. Cognitive horsepower, measurable in hertz and synchronization strength.
Wow.
And this is seen as vindicating a system designed explicitly to find and accelerate the highest performing biological processors, to filter out anyone who might have, surface level achievements but lacks the deep physical architecture for genuine explosive insight.
That is just a brutally objective way to assess someone. It removes the human element almost entirely and just focuses on pure neurological capacity. The anecdote of Li Na really brings this home. This is already defining a new kind of elite.
The story of Li Na, a 10-year-old girl in one of these specialized residential academies, it just illustrates the cold efficiency of this model perfectly. Her entire educational reality is framed by objective biological metrics.
And her instructors didn't describe her progress in terms of grades. They used the phrase,
the thermal signature of her logic.
The thermal signature of her logic. That is profoundly clinical. It's like they're not viewing a person, but a machine they're trying to optimize.
That's the strategic shift. Her breakthrough, it came after weeks of intensive exposure to advanced topographical calculus. She was subjected to what they call high-density knowledge saturation.
It's constant pressure.
Constant, immense pressure. So when the monitors showed that sudden, violent burst of high-frequency neural synchronization, it wasn't a magical moment for the researchers. It was the expected physical event. It was the moment her neural pathways finally forged the connection under that immense weight.
Her achievement wasn't spontaneous. It was manufactured.
It was manufactured through rigor.
It seems to validate the argument that intelligence isn't so much about stored facts, but more about the efficient, high-fidelity communication between brain areas. But this idea, it isn't entirely new in neuroscience, is it? We've known for a while there's a physiological component to intelligence.
That's absolutely right. The roots of this go back decades to foundational work done by researchers like Richard Hare, who's an emeritus professor at UC Irvine. Years ago, he was pioneering studies that suggested brain imaging could one day just replace traditional IQ tests.
And his early work had a really counterintuitive finding, right?
It did. He found that brighter people often showed less brain activation when they were solving problems.
Less activation. That sounds like they're not working as hard.
It's the efficiency paradox. Smarter brains use less glucose, less energy to solve a problem than less smart brains. Hare's argument was, this isn't laziness, it's pure efficiency. They've refined their cognitive networks so precisely that the processing is lean, it's fast, and it's targeted.
And this led to the theory.
The parieto-frontal integration theory, or PFIT.
Right, PFIT,
No.
which basically says that intelligence isn't in one single smart spot in the brain. It's distributed across a network, particularly involving the parietal and frontal lobes.
Correct. The PFIT model posits that intelligence really hinges on how effectively information is communicated and integrated across this widespread network. The key is network efficiency, measured in speed and coordination.
Which is exactly what the CAS research is targeting with high-frequency synchronization.
It is. By improving the imaging technology, researchers can now record the problem-solving experience millisecond by millisecond. They can literally track the flow of information through that PFIT circuit until the aha moment is reached.
So instead of measuring the result, the correct answer on a test, they're measuring the process itself, the elegance and the speed of the neural computation.
Yeah.
That fundamentally changes how you identify talent. Are you just looking for brains that move information faster, or are you looking for entirely different patterns of genius?
Potentially both. The first goal is to identify the signature patterns of elite performance, the neural fingerprints of people with, say, IQs of 130 plus versus average participants.
And once those patterns are mapped?
The strategic implication, as Hare himself acknowledged, it shifts from identification to intervention. If you understand the mechanism of intelligence, you might eventually be able to manipulate the brain using cognitive training or neurochemicals or other means to increase that specific synchronization capacity.
And as the tech gets cheaper and more reliable, potentially replacing all the costly test prep and subjective essays, the pull towards this objective biological metric becomes overwhelming. It starts as a scientific curiosity, but it becomes a competitive advantage really, really fast.
And that strategic imperative, the need for validated, accelerated genius, is what drives this whole thing from scientific observation into a full-blown cognitive arms race.
Okay, so this brings us right to the core geopolitical tension. If one side is optimizing for this measurable industrial scale insight, what are the competing philosophies? How does this define national strategy?
Well, this section of our dive contrasts two philosophies of mind and education that are just utterly opposed. The sources we reviewed present a very strong and frankly a very harsh critique of contemporary Western pedagogy, framing it against this ruthless optimization agenda.
Let's address that critique head on then. Sources suggest that by dismantling gifted programs, by diluting STEM curricula, and by prioritizing emotional safety above all else, Western education has effectively created a cognitive low-power mode.
The accusation is that this approach systematically discourages the kind of sustained, high-intensity mental struggle, the pressure that is required to generate that high-frequency neural synchronization we were just talking about. The argument being made is that the mind is capable of incredible things, but the system has to demand it. It has to require rigor.
And the most provocative claim in the source material is that by deliberately lowering cognitive demands in the name of equity, this is a civilizational scale act of self-mutilation. It's artificially suppressing the potential of its most capable minds. That's explosive language.
It's extremely charged language, but it reflects the viewpoint of those operating under the strategic paradigm. The core contrast is philosophical. One side sees the mind as a garden to be tended, prioritizing comfort, emotional safety, self-discovery, a progressive model.
And the other side?
The other side, the one engaged in the industrial capture of insight, sees the mind as a strategic asset to be optimized for national survival. When you view intellectual capital that way, any pedagogical choice that impedes its maximum optimization is seen as, well, self-sabotage.
But doesn't that critique just overlook the benefits of a more holistic approach? What about the creativity that emerges outside a high-pressure standardized environment? The proven benefits of psychological safety for collaboration, or the need to address the very real mental health concerns that come with relentless pressure?
It's a fair question. The sources, coming from the strategic viewpoint, they would acknowledge those concerns, but categorize them as luxuries that impede strategic necessity.
Luxuries?
Luxuries. They'd argue that while emotional safety is valuable, the ultimate goal of the state is survival and technological dominance. And in that view, breakthroughs, the kind that reshape global power, they don't emerge from generalized safety. They emerge from disciplined, systematic engagement that builds the necessary knowledge stockpile.
So the aha moment needs fuel. If the tank's empty, the engine can't turn over.
Precisely. The core argument is that the spontaneous epiphany, that moment of conceptual blending, it simply cannot happen without a foundational knowledge stockpile fostered by rigorous, systematic education. If you lack that high-density information base, the brain just doesn't have the raw material to forge those high-amplitude connections.
Which is why the systematic study, what Western critics might call cramming, is seen by this strategic mindset as the essential disciplined precursor to generating those breakthroughs.
Yes, and we see this conflict perfectly illustrated in the story of researcher Chen.
Right.
So researcher Chen was part of a high-intensity cognitive training pilot program. It was designed to maximize insight generation. And he drew this direct comparison between his experience and his cousin's, who was at a prestigious holistic university in the West.
His cousin was focusing on self-discovery and interdisciplinary play.
Which sounds wonderful, but Chen's experience was the polar opposite.
What was his like?
His was a grueling, systematic regime of high-density knowledge saturation. He described a state of constant, focused engagement where intellectual struggle wasn't something to be avoided, but something to be actively sought out. His claim was that creativity in a strategic context is a luxury you only get with a prepared mind.
He said his aha moments were happening on a schedule.
On a schedule, as a direct, manufactured result of neural pathways that were hardened by industrial-scale discipline.
That is a fundamental inversion of the romantic Western ideal, where inspiration is spontaneous, it's unscheduled. Here, it's the predictable output of a tuned biological engine.
And this systematic, scheduled approach is built on that belief that the mind is an engine that must be optimized to a specific frequency to achieve national objectives. It prioritizes measurable, engineered results over a holistic process that might have slower, less predictable outcomes.
So if the CAS breakthrough proved that insight is observable, the next logical step is intervention, moving from just watching to actively manufacturing those moments.
Absolutely. The strategic goal is no longer just to observe. It's to develop targeted cognitive training protocols. These are protocols that some sources describe as a brain cooling and restructuring technology.
Brain cooling?
It's a metaphor for optimizing the system. They're designed to increase the frequency and the reliability of these insight events in strategically vital personnel. Your top engineers, your scientific leaders, your high-level planners. It's intense cognitive calisthenics, but for national strength.
This is the concept of computational sovereignty, or brain power sovereignty.
It's the ultimate geopolitical objective. In an age defined by AI, where raw computational power is rapidly leveling out, the ability to command and optimize the highest quality human brain function is seen as the final, irreplaceable competitive edge.
The civilization that masters the mass production of validated genius moments
Holds the priority right to define and solve the next generation of global challenges. The strategy moves innovation away from relying on the accidental appearance of the lonely genius,
Right, that myth.
and toward a factory model of innovation.
Can we look deeper into how this factory model actually works? The anecdote of Wei's team seems to illustrate this perfectly. This shift from waiting for luck to manufacturing a breakthrough.
Okay, so consider this high-stakes lab in Shenzhen. The team leader, Wei, was facing a critical, really complex bottleneck in advanced semiconductor architecture. This was a problem with enormous national significance.
So instead of just throwing everyone in a room to brainstorm.
Exactly. Instead of relying on traditional, unstructured brainstorming, just waiting for someone to have a good idea, his team used a specific, highly structured protocol designed to industrialize insight. They weren't waiting for inspiration. They were actively and systematically trying to trigger cognitive synchronization.
How do you actively trigger synchronization? Is this external stimuli, or is it purely about how they structure the intellectual challenge?
It was the latter. The protocol focused on combining systematic, high-density information input with timed, low-latency collaborative problem spaces, all while monitoring the neural signatures of the participants. The structure of their mental work was designed to force the mind to attempt connections at the highest possible frequency.
So the environment itself was engineered to increase the tension and the raw knowledge needed for that breakthrough discharge.
Precisely. And the result? We described it as a manufactured breakthrough. It wasn't a stroke of luck, but a manufactured outcome. The moment his team's collective high-frequency neural synchronization solved the problem. And this, he argued, was achieving cognitive sovereignty over a specific technological domain.
It frames the human brain not as this sacred temple of individual creativity, but as a biological computer whose output can be optimized, scheduled, and applied to solve specific national challenges on demand. So on one side of the world, we have this relentless focus on accelerating and optimizing individual biological capacity through intense rigor. But this entire strategic competition is facing an equally profound threat from a completely different direction.
Yes, the ease, the convenience, and the apparent magic of generative AI, which poses the risk of eroding that internal capacity from the inside out.
That is the critical pivot. The rise of sophisticated AI introduces this profound duality. It's sold as the ultimate cognitive extender, helping us synthesize information. But the strategic danger is that it creates the perfect conditions for cognitive atrophy,
Leading to what we term the hollowed mind.
Okay, so we just discussed the industrialization of genius through maximized rigor. Now we have to turn to the danger posed by maximized ease. AI is celebrated as this seamless external augmentation. But when we outsource complex synthesis, what are we losing internally?
We are losing the effort. The risk is that generative AI's ability to automate synthesis, argumentation, and evaluation allows the user to systematically bypass the very mental strain required to build resilient internal cognitive architecture.
This leads directly to the hollowed mind.
It does. It's a dependency on external tools where the user systematically avoids the effortful processes that are essential for deep, durable learning.
And the seductive question that everyone is asking now is, why should I spend years building deep knowledge when an AI can deliver a perfect, polished answer instantly?
And that question, while it sounds logical in our productivity-obsessed world, it fundamentally confuses access with ability. A human needs sustained engagement to build internal cognitive scaffolding, the schemas that let us think abstractly and solve novel problems.
So mistaking the immediate access to a flawless AI output for genuine internal ability, that's the trap.
That is the primary mechanism by which the hollowed mind develops.
And this concept of intellectual independence is defined as cognitive sovereignty in this context, right?
Absolutely. Cognitive sovereignty is the intellectual independence you need to set original goals, to critically validate AI outputs, and most importantly, to have the internal confidence and knowledge to overrule the tool when it is wrong or biased.
To be the master, not just the operator.
Exactly. And the danger we all face is the sovereignty trap.
Lay out the mechanics of that trap for us.
The trap is set by a collision. You have AI's authoritative, high-quality output, its frictionless availability, and a well-documented human bias. Our default tendency toward the path of least cognitive resistance, the cognitive miser. The AI's competence tempts the user to just cede their intellectual judgment because it's simply easier and faster.
And this isn't a universal weakness. Some people are more prone to this than others.
Correct. The trap is especially potent for individuals with a low need for cognition, or NFC. These are people who are intrinsically motivated to avoid effortful thinking. For them, AI offers a perfect socially acceptable off-ramp from cognitive strain.
Which accelerates their skill decay because they were already predisposed to take the easy route.
Right, so let's connect this to the fundamental architecture of human thought. We can use dual process theory to explain why deliberative reasoning is inherently so slow and difficult.
Okay, so dual process theory. Two systems.
Two systems. System one is the brain's default. Fast, intuitive, automatic, low effort. It runs on shortcuts or heuristics. System two is the opposite. Slow, conscious, analytical, logical, and it requires significant effort and working memory.
And critical deliberative thinking. The kind you need to evaluate a convincing but maybe flawed AI output. That's strictly the domain of System 2.
It is. And because System 1 is the default, rationality requires the active, strenuous intervention of System 2 to override it. That effort has to be explicitly triggered. This is why AI is so seductive. It lets us stay firmly in System 1 while getting outputs that look like they required high System 2 effort.
And this ties directly into cognitive load theory, CLT.
Yeah.
How does AI interfere with the load we need for deep learning?
CLT states that learning depends on working memory, which is severely limited. To learn deeply, we have to incur what's called germane load. That's the effort we spend building internal mental schemas. The entire goal of learning is to build complex, resilient schemas in your long-term memory.
So by providing frictionless, polished answers, AI just removes the need for that germane load. It eliminates the mental struggle.
Exactly. The human mind needs to encounter cognitive dissonance, conflict, uncertainty, the gap between what you know and new information to trigger the necessary effort. By outsourcing synthesis, we eliminate the precursors for that cognitive work. You risk bypassing the core learning process itself. It feels like you know the answer, but you've only memorized the path to get it.
So what's happening in the brain neurobiologically when it encounters that conflict and has to decide whether to engage System 2?
The brain has a highly specialized conflict detection system, and it's centered in the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. The ACC monitors for conflicting signals like when your intuitive, fast answer contradicts the logical constraints of a problem.
But just detecting the conflict isn't enough.
No, resolving it requires the cognitive control system in the lateral prefrontal cortex, the LPFC. Studies show the ACC can light up even when people still give the wrong answer.
Meaning the brain knows there's a conflict, but the system 2 effort isn't strong enough to override the mistake. The cognitive miser wins.
And in the AI context, this is a major vulnerability. AI systems are engineered for fluency, for plausibility. By providing these immediate, highly plausible answers, the risk is twofold. First, the output is so smooth that it might only generate a very weak conflict signal from the ACC. It just looks right.
And second, even if a weak conflict signal is detected, a user with low domain knowledge, a hollowed mind, they don't have the internal schema to process that signal. They can't recruit the prefrontal cortex for the deep critical examination needed.
Which leads to the most serious consequence, the use it or lose it principle of neuroplasticity. Neural circuits that are chronically understimulated become less efficient. So relying excessively on AI risks undertraining precisely those ACC-LPFC circuits that are essential for critical thinking.
This is how we accumulate cognitive debt.
Yes. We gain short-term productivity and efficiency at the expense of deep encoding, memory integration, and long-term intellectual resilience.
But the reality is that AI is increasing productivity. We see it everywhere. So how do we reconcile the risk of the hollowed mind with these massive reported benefits?
We reconcile it by understanding the expertise duality. The impact of AI is highly conditional on the user's pre-existing internal architecture, their prior knowledge. AI can function as both a leveler and an amplifier at the same time.
Okay, let's break down the leveler effect for novices.
For novices, people who lack those rich internal schemas, AI acts as an external hippocampal system. It provides the structure, the steps, the information they need to complete routine tasks. They can perform better than they could alone because the tool is filling their knowledge gap.
The danger is dependency.
Dependency and illusory competence. They never endure the cognitive strain they need to actually encode the learning in their neocortex.
So it makes them efficient operators of the tool, but not fundamentally deeper thinkers in the domain. They know what to do, but not why it works.
Exactly. They're performing tasks above their internal competence level, which leads to skill decay. But conversely, the amplifier effect is what we see in experts.
How does AI act as an amplifier for them?
Experts already have those rich, well-organized internal knowledge schemas. For them, AI acts as a neocortical partner. They direct the tool, they rapidly generate patterns, and then, and this is the critical part, they invest more mental work to rigorously integrate, test, and validate the suggestions.
Because they have the depth of knowledge required to spot the errors, the hallucinations, and synthesize the information into real innovation.
Yes, and we saw this vividly in that Harvard BCG study of consultants. AI quickly leveled the playing field for the junior consultants. It boosted their performance. But the moment the task entered the jagged frontier, where AI was unreliable or required nuanced judgment, the novice's performance just collapsed.
While the experts, who could identify and correct the flaws, continued to accelerate.
The key is that the expert's advantage is rooted in their willingness and capacity to exert more cognitive effort, not less. For the expert, AI doesn't replace their brain. It partners with their fortified internal architecture.
So what's the prescription then? How do you cultivate immunity to the sovereignty trap?
The antidote is what we call the fortified mind. This is a resilient, dynamic, cognitive architecture built not just on raw capacity, but on structure and disposition. It rests on 3 pillars. First, a robust foundation of well-organized, domain-specific schemas. This is deep, transferable knowledge you build through deliberate practice. Second, proficient metacognitive skills, self-monitoring and epistemic vigilance, knowing when and how to rigorously challenge AI outputs.
Third,
The cultivated disposition for effortful System 2 thinking is the consistent habit of choosing desirable difficulty, that intellectual struggle that the brain needs to prioritize encoding and consolidation.
So the fortified mind is the functional prerequisite for cognitive sovereignty. It lets the user direct, challenge, and overrule the AI.
It transforms the AI from a mere leveler, which fosters dependency, into a true amplifier of human intellect.
We've explored 2 huge paths then. The hyper-optimization of the individual genius through rigor and the risk of internal collapse due to AI-enabled ease. So now we turn to a framework designed to resolve this tension generative collective intelligence, or GCI. This framework attempts to blend AI efficiency with human wisdom through structured collaboration.
GCI is revolutionary because it reframes AI. It's not just a computational engine, it's a cultural technology, a tool for organizational synthesis. The central premise is that the greatest potential of AI is not in replacing human judgment, but in enabling sophisticated collaboration and knowledge aggregation.
So AI has two roles here.
Dual roles, yes. It's an agent with computational power, and it's a technology that creates a dynamic cognitive bridge between human creativity and machine capabilities.
The idea is to create a synergy where collective human reasoning, creativity, wisdom, context, causal thinking is seamlessly integrated with AI's speed, scale, and pattern recognition. It's an attempt to formally weaponize collective wisdom.
And it's grounded in the recognition that human reasoning is still superior for causal understanding. As the AI pioneer Judea Pearl observed, "You are smarter than your data. Data do not understand causes and effects. Humans do." GCI is structured specifically to preserve that essential human quality.
So if the output is collective wisdom, what is the mathematical engine that lets GCI reliably aggregate all these diverse judgments into coherent knowledge?
GCI relies on two foundational mathematical principles. The first is the law of comparative judgment, which actually dates back to the psychologist Louis Leon Thurstone almost a century ago.
Thurstone's work sounds pretty academic. How does that translate to a high-stakes corporate environment?
It solves the problem of subjective ranking. Most decision-making relies on people rating ideas on a scale, like 1 to 10, which is highly unreliable. Your 8 is my 6.
Sure.
Thurstone's method avoids this by relying on pairwise comparison. Instead of asking you to rate idea A, it just asks you to compare idea A to idea B. Which one is better?
Like when you're getting an eyeglasses prescription. Which lens is clearer, A or B?
Exactly like that. And even when individual comparisons are inconsistent, you might say A is better than B, B is better than C, but then C is better than A. Thurstone's math uses maximum likelihood estimation to infer the underlying objective values for each one.
So it translates subjective human preferences, A is better than B,
into objective cardinal scores. A has a value of 0.5, B has a value of 0.35, and as new judgments are introduced, these scores dynamically adjust, reflecting the evolving collective consensus.
That's powerful. It injects rigor into subjective human intuition, making it computationally useful. So what's the second principle? You said it addresses the problem of complacency.
It does. It addresses the exploitation-exploration dilemma, and the principle is the minimum regret principle. This is a mathematical strategy that compels an agent or a group to make a decision at any given moment that minimizes the worst-case regret they might face if that choice turns out to be wrong.
How does minimizing regret mathematically compel exploration?
It works by penalizing complacency. To minimize the worst-case regret, the group has to engage in necessary exploration, looking for new, potentially much better ideas over mere exploitation, which is just sticking to what's familiar and safe.
So if a group only relies on what they know,
and a superior unknown solution exists that they haven't explored, the potential regret of missing that optimal solution grows mathematically huge over time.
So it's a mathematical imperative to avoid complacency and proactively seek discovery. It forces the group to take intelligent risks, not just safe bets.
Yes. Think about strategic resource allocation. If a company puts 100% of its resources into exploiting its current best product, the minimum regret principle will force it to divert a small, measured portion of that budget to explore nascent, high-risk technologies. Why? Because the regret of being blindsided by a competitor's radical breakthrough is mathematically worse than the risk of losing that small exploratory investment.
Okay, so GCI uses these principles, comparative judgment and minimum regret, to orchestrate human and AI interaction, designing what the source material calls the architecture of epiphany.
The goal is to industrialize serendipity, to guide human and AI agents through these structured interactions to maximize the chances of conceptual blending.
The integration of seemingly disparate elements from different mental spaces to create genuinely new conceptual structures.
Which is where innovation lives.
How does this structured collaboration prevent the usual pitfalls of group dynamics? Groupthink, or just the loudest voice dominating the room?
The GCI process has key structural elements to protect the integrity of the output. One of the most critical is identity masking during the deliberation and judgment phases. This actively protects against status hierarchies, seniority bias, and groupthink.
Because you're forced to engage with the idea, not the status of the person who suggested it.
Exactly. And the system also uses AI to adaptively select items for peer review, ensuring that unconventional or minority ideas, if they are consistently judged superior in pairwise comparison, rise to the top, even if they came from a junior contributor.
So a high-status expert can't just bulldoze the conversation with their reputation. The quality of the insight is what matters.
That's the goal. And this structured collaboration is how GCI transforms subjective human judgments into objective, measurable outputs. It preserves intuition in a computational form, which allows it to tackle these huge, complex societal problems like that healthcare challenge you mentioned.
All right, let's elaborate on that healthcare example where GCI was used to synthesize the views of all these conflicting stakeholders.
Okay, so this initiative brought together a huge and often antagonistic ecosystem. Biotech leaders, pharma companies, insurers, venture capitalists, policy people, patient advocacy groups.
All in one process.
All in one process. Using GCI, they systematically input their priorities, their assumptions, their causal beliefs about the system's failures. The system then facilitated thousands of controlled pairwise comparisons and used the minimum regret principle to explore some really radical, unconventional solutions.
And the blue ocean breakthrough that came out of it wasn't an incremental improvement, it was a complete reframing of the problem.
That's right. After cycling through this collective reasoning process where human intuition and context met mathematical rigor, a core diagnosis emerged that transcended all the individual conflicts. The problem with the system is that it treats healthcare as an expense.
And the reframe was,
what if we treated healthcare as an asset class instead?
That is a profound conceptual blend. Shifting healthcare from a line item on a balance sheet to an investment vehicle, an infrastructure asset. What were the immediate practical implications of that?
It immediately unlocked entirely new strategic avenues for funding and policy. If healthcare is an asset, then preventative care is an investment that increases the value of that asset,
right,
rather than just a cost to be avoided. It changes the entire financial incentive structure for insurers, governments, patients.
It was a true blue ocean breakthrough idea.
And it was achieved not by a single genius in a vacuum, but through collective structured reasoning. The AI functioned as a trusted linguistic model of their deliberation, fully traceable, allowing the team to move quickly from this radical creative idea to innovative policy development with a high degree of trust and alignment.
This suggests that GCI might be the ultimate path toward building trust in AI itself, by making the process transparent and preserving human agency and wisdom at the core of the reasoning model.
It's the critical difference. Trust is built through the transparency of the mathematical process, the clear attribution of ideas, the explainability of outcomes, and continuous iterative improvement. GCI explicitly embraces that essential complementarity of human creativity and machine scale, allowing for both serendipitous discovery and industrial-scale epiphanies through a highly intentional structure. So as we conclude this deep dive, we really see the future of cognitive dominance splitting into these two fascinating divergent paths. On one side, you have the drive for biophysical efficiency, the industrialization of the individual genius moment, capturing that high-frequency neural synchronization spike to secure national strategic assets.
A path that prioritizes measurable, accelerated output, the ultimate optimization of the biological processor.
Exactly. And on the other side, we have the path of human-AI synergy and collective wisdom, the generative collective intelligence framework, focused on creating a sophisticated, trustworthy cognitive bridge,
which prioritizes maximizing decentralized, validated, trust-based collaboration to solve these complex systemic societal problems, but using rigorous mathematical frameworks to do it.
Both models, in their own way, are competing fiercely to define the source of future innovation and, ultimately, global power. The first prioritizes raw, measurable cognitive horsepower from a highly selected, accelerated elite.
And the second prioritizes maximizing the collective, decentralized intelligence of the sociological network, using structure and math to eliminate our human biases.
It is clear that the race to define the next generation of human capacity is a competition between the ultimate optimization of the individual biological machine and the seamless, structured integration of the collective sociological network.
The victor in this contest will determine not just what problems humanity solves in the coming decades, but fundamentally how truth, expertise, and innovation are generated and constructed. The civilization that transitions from passively awaiting inspiration to actively capturing and replicating it on an industrial scale is securing the final entry ticket to a future where it holds a decisive, perhaps irreversible advantage in the relentless contest to comprehend and reshape the physical world. The race to control the aha is the race to control what comes next.